More pictures of armored personnel carriers that arrive Nigeria through Onne Port in Rivers State. If you're familiar with these armored personnel carriers, you can tell us in the comments the likely country of origin of these APCs. The paintwork shows it's headed to the Sahel region, which means it's not meant to be used in Nigeria. Anyway, it looks like France is trying to replicate the same military strategy they used in Ivory Coast in 2011. They used rebels as ground forces to capture Laurent Gbagbo, the former president of Ivory Coast. We will come back to this in a moment. Let's look at the latest opposition against military intervention in Niger. Russia has warned ECOWAS that any military intervention in Niger may lead to a protracted confrontation. The Russia's foreign ministry said that a military intervention in Niger will destabilize the entire Sahel region. Whether you like Russia or not, this is the whole truth. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. ECOWAS are also hitting back at Russia. They said that they will hold Russia responsible if the Wagner Group gets involved in Niger Republic. According to the ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Ambassador Abou Fattah Musa, the Wagner Group apparently is in Mali today. The Malian government says this is an agreement between them and the Russian Federation, that ECOWAS will take them by their word, which means any sort of action that infringes on human rights or devastation in our region by these private military contractors. We are going to hold the other countries of our region responsible for that. All this finger pointing by the ECOWAS commissioner, why not avoid any military intervention in the first place? That will definitely bring peace to the region, and there will be no need for any private military organization to intervene or even other countries. Remember that Burkina Faso and Mali already said they will help the Nigerian military to defend their country if ever they are invaded by anyone, that they will consider an invasion of Niger as an invasion of their own countries. So effectively, any military intervention in Niger, the invading forces will be fighting against 3 countries. Also, consider the fact that Burkina and to some extent Mali are already Russian allies. So they can effectively draw Russia into the war. And of course, Putin will be willing to help, despite being bogged down in Ukraine. They might not send troops, but will definitely send heavy equipment, which will ultimately make it a protracted conflict, because when you have 2 equally armed opponents, to make a headway will be very difficult. So in the interest of peace and stability in the region, ECOWAS should drop the idea of any military intervention, because there is cause and effect. If someone is planning to invade a country, they won't sit around and wait to welcome the person with open arms when they invade. They will definitely defend themselves. They will seek help in doing that, so the outcome is largely unpredictable considering all the factors. This is why the scenario in Niger is quite different from Ivory Coast. Any intervention in Niger will draw in more people, unlike the Ivory Coast, where the rebels were already controlling some cities in northern Ivory Coast before they eventually moved down to Abidjan. So what they are planning in Niger might not be as simple as they think. As the day goes by, the pressure on France to leave Niger increases. Nigerians this time around protested at the French military base in Niamey. They are not only protesting that the French military personnel should leave Niger, they are also protesting against any military intervention by ECOWAS. Algeria is another country that is vehemently opposed to any military intervention in Niger. Would you blame them? They experienced what happened in Libya, which of course was led by France and eventual involvement of NATO. Also in Mali, down their southern border, they've all had serious security issues for several years. So Algeria will not stand by and watch Niger be invaded, because war is very unpredictable. Forget about all the buzzwords, military intervention or declaration of war. All of them have the potential to veer off course. And at that point, it becomes unpredictable. No one wants instability and uncertainty around his country, because it can quickly escalate and overflow into your country. Even the warmongering by Tinubu and ECOWAS is to some extent creating uncertainty in Nigeria. That's why people here in Kano are showing their displeasure that they don't want war in Niger Republic. If you're an investor, whether a local or foreign investor, will you invest in times of uncertainty? You will definitely hold on and study the situation first before making any investment. No one wants to gamble with his money, even if you want to open a small business or rent a stall somewhere around the city, and all of a sudden riots break out. That alone will stop you from going on with the investment. So uncertainty is bad for business. With the likelihood of Nigeria going into recession very soon, what the government should be doing is not to make it come sooner. Instead, they are supposed to create a peaceful environment in order to attract investment, both local and foreign. There's also a rumor that Algeria is planning to supply electricity to Niger. Nigeria supplies about 70% of Niger's electricity, which they've cut off since the announcement of sanctions against Niger. It doesn't look like Algeria can supply the electricity anytime soon because there's no existing grid between Algeria and Niger. The power lines will take some time to be built between these countries, so it won't be an immediate solution to Niger's power supply problems. Meanwhile, the Chinese contractor handling the Kadanji Dam project in Niger have suspended work because of the freezing of their funds. Since the military seized power, many countries sanctioned Niger. So as a result of these economic sanctions, the Chinese contractor cannot transfer funds to Niger. The $800 million dam with a power generating capacity of 130 megawatts was initially set to be completed in 2026. The suspension of work will definitely affect the completion date, except the Nigerian government finds alternative funding or another way to move the funds without involving the banking system. Otherwise, there's no hope that work will restart there very soon, because sanctions will not be lifted while the military is still in power. Also, the completion of the crude oil pipeline from Niger to Cotonou in Benin Republic, which was initially set to be completed at the end of this year, may no longer be feasible because the Chinese contractor handling the project must heed the advice of the Chinese government to their citizens in Niger to evacuate with immediate effect. No one wants to be caught up in a war. The threat of an invasion by ECOWAS is still very much on the table. What is going on in Niger right now can be likened to what happened in Ivory Coast in 2011. Yes, when the rebels backed by France were a few kilometers into Abidjan, many people started taking evacuation seriously. More foreigners live in Ivory Coast compared to Niger, and by the time the rebels invaded Abidjan, most foreigners have either evacuated or taken refuge inside the French military base in Abidjan. The quest to capture Laurent Gbagbo was over in a few days after French combat helicopters bombarded their main military base a few kilometers from the presidential palace. The capture of Laurent Gbagbo effectively brought Alassane Ouattara to power, having won the contested presidential election the previous year. So this is what France might be planning to repeat in Niger. The only problem now is that they need foot soldiers, like the rebels they used in Ivory Coast to capture Gbagbo. Gbagbo seized power in Ivory Coast and started distancing himself from France, which of course they didn't like. So Gbagbo's refusal to accept defeat and relinquish power to Alassane Ouattara presented France the best opportunity to get back at him. And they seized the opportunity, starting from their influence in the United Nations as a permanent member, when the UN passed a resolution banning the use of heavy equipment between the Ivorian military and the rebels. It was France that enforced the resolution on behalf of the United Nations. Not that Gbagbo is a saint, he was all about himself, he never considered the future of his country, that his actions might plunge the country into an unnecessary war. Just like most African politicians, they're always selfish, they think only about themselves, not the people. The surprising thing in all this is that the same man was willing to use force to remove Gbagbo and take over, turned out to be worse than Gbagbo. Alassane Ouattara is busy today talking and planning about how to contribute Ivorian troops for the invasion of Niger to achieve a restoration of democracy. But no one planned any invasion of Ivory Coast when he committed a political coup and changed the constitution to be eligible to contest for a third term in office. The same thing he accused Gbagbo of doing. Gbagbo was in power for about 10 years as a civilian head of state without an election. Gbagbo refused all entreaties by the opposition to conduct an election until he eventually accepted to hold one in 2010 after they accepted that he will be on the ballot. France and the opposition initially refused that Gbagbo should be on the ballot in the 2010 presidential election, having been in office for 10 years, which is 2 terms, going by the French presidential system of governance, 5 years per term, unlike the US presidential system of 4 years per term. So looking back at what happened in Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara is in no position to talk about democracy. He's like a pot calling the kettle black. Many Ivorians were casualties in the conflict that brought him to power. After Gbagbo was captured, he didn't consider all this. He didn't consider that same scenario might play out again if he succeeds in amending the constitution to be eligible to contest for 3rd term. Why do many Africans see political offices as their birthright? Not that the coup in Niger is justified, but the most important thing is that there was no casualty compared to what happened in Ivory Coast or in Nigeria during the presidential election. It was a palace coup and so far they are in control. There's no breakdown of law and order in Niger, no urgency that requires any military intervention to help people, except for France that feels the people in power will not do their bidding, and their continued stay in power might lead to their losing influence in Niger. This is understandable. Also, the United States that just finished constructing a $100 million military base in Niger, they are concerned they might lose the military base because the military regime is unpredictable And now they have massive support in Niger. It will not be easy for the Westerners to control them. So these are the main issues. This is why they want ECOWAS to quickly intervene in Niger before the military takes drastic actions by issuing decrees that will cut off France permanently. Forget about all the posturing. France knows their servicemen will leave Niger if the Nigerian military decides to force them out. The same way France is using Alassane Ouattara to achieve a military intervention is the same way they are using Tinubu. Like Ouattara, Tinubu is not in a position to preach democracy to anyone because the election that brought him to power is still being contested in court. In fact, the military coup in Niger was more peaceful than the presidential election of February 25th, 2023. More than 70 people lost their lives. In contrast, not a single one did in Niger. So imagine the audacity of the two men who committed violent political coups in their countries, telling someone who did the same thing in a peaceful manner to relinquish power. What an irony. Since they've refused to reinstate Bazoum, the former president, to power, Nigerians should be left alone to forge their political future by themselves, unless they want to make it obvious that they are working for the interest of France and the United States, against the interest of northern Nigeria, who have many relatives in Niger, also against the interest of Nigeria at large, because we all suffer the consequences, the humanitarian crisis, and the security issues if war breaks out. Just like respect, legitimacy can never be bought. It can only be earned. It's unfortunate that African leaders are working against their people's interest. What's in it for them? Other leaders, be it European, American, Asian, even Arabs, will never work for the interest of foreigners. Their interest comes first, before anyone else. These are people that will quickly tag the opposition as being unpatriotic when they criticize them. But there's no patriotism in any of their actions. Look at all the security challenges Nigeria faces today. No one is talking about how to solve them, but they are talking about how to invade another country. Even as they are planning this invasion, Nigerians living in Niger are begging to be evacuated. There's no plan for them. They've abandoned them to their own fate. Thanks for watching.